Hello and welcome to Chess with Simon. I'm Simon. So we're reviewing the games of the OCA Cowley Blitz tournament. In our first game, we looked at a game by Dave Robson, a very interesting game against Purplerooks. And now we're going to look at one of Purplerooks' games. So we're just going to play tag and basically keep handing it on and see where we go. So Purplerooks is Gilbert from Banbury and a member of Leamington and District Chess Leagues and Friends, member of the Cowley Blitz. So let's have a look at Purplerooks' games. Purplerooks'. Okay, so I saw an interesting game against Djdave28. So Purplerooks v Djdave28. Let's have a look. Pawn d4, pawn d5. Purplerooks plays his now familiar London system. Bishop f4, very solid and sensible move, very popular with the elite. Knight f6, e3, this is just book. e6, knight f3, again it's just book. Black gets to play the Queen's Gambit, so rather than white playing the Queen's Gambit, black plays the Queen's Gambit, but actually the Queen's Bishop is locked in, so you don't get the advantages that white gets from the Queen's Gambit, and you're still a tempo behind, but c5 is a good move. c3 just to defend that d pawn, not that it's an immediate threat, but it just in the long term defending that pawn. And also giving options. If black does take on d4, you've got choices of taking with the c pawn or the e pawn. It's really a matter of taste. You can get into kind of a exchange Slav type positions here, can't you? If you if black took, you could take with the c pawn and get into an exchange Slav. Knight c6, very sensible. Knight bd2. Bishop d7. Now, this isn't the most common move. Bishop d6 is the most common move, offering the exchange of bishops and potentially slightly weakening black's dark squares, but not fatally so. But black plays bishop d7. Bishop d3 from white. This is the most common move and is also very common in this system. I mean, you can play bishop e2, but bishop d3 is much more common, sort of aiming at that king's side. And black developing the king's bishop, getting ready to castle, very sensible. And of course there's no bishop d6 now because that square is no longer defended. White brings the knight into e5. This is the move that people play in this position of the 4 games that have reached this position. And you can see why, because the knight's defended by the pawn and the bishop, so you've got a choice of taking back with either if black takes. And this is pretty thematic for these sort of London system stroke stone wall type positions, reverse stone wall type positions. Black castles, very sensibly, and here again we see this h4 move from white, so it'd be interesting to see if this game is before or after the game with Star Builder, but h4 just sort of introducing various attacking ideas. Black plays rook c8, and white's now feeding that knight through, so it's defending the knight on e5 and also potentially can move to e5 if the knight on e5 exchanges itself for something or takes somewhere. Pawn b6, this is a common move in these systems, and you understand why. It defends the c-pawn, but also it can be a move that frees the bishop on c8, so the bishop can come to either b7 or a6, and here that's not something that black wants to do. In fact, the engine wants to move white's bishop to a6, and so I think the slight criticism is this weakening the light squares a bit on the queen side. White doesn't care about the light squares on the queen side. White's just getting on with it. White cares about the king on the king's side. So it's just g4, you know, let's open some lines. Does this sack a pawn? So let's have a look if it sacks a pawn. No, it doesn't sack a pawn, because if black takes on e5, white can take back with a knight on e5, hence defending the pawn. I don't think it would matter if it did sack a pawn, but anyway. Because in a previous game, Purplerooks did sack a pawn in this sort of... although with a fianchetto on the king's side, not with just the pawns on the original squares. Black's just starting some queenside play, so meeting white's kingside play with queenside play. Firstly, pawn c4 attacking the bishop, now pawn b5. White plays pawn g5, and actually this creates a crisis quite quickly, so that knight needs to move. Black chooses to retreat it. Actually, the engine slightly prefers knight e4, but you can see why black would choose to retreat here. And white here, really good move, exchanging the knight, and now moving that knight in, so knight into e5, and we'll see this plays an important part in the game, but also that's a natural square for the knight, also making way for the queen to come to h5, or possibly g4, but more likely h5, which is very useful. Black gets on with creating queen-side counterplay, and also remembering the king's in the centre. And having the king in the centre caused some problems in the game against Star Builder. But now we've got queen h5, which immediately creates the threat of checkmate in one. Actually, the engine found a sacrifice here. So what is available to white actually is taking here. This would have been hard to find in a blitz game, and actually, I doubt I'd have played this in a blitz game. So white actually played queen h5, which I think is a good idea. It continues the attack. It creates an immediate threat. It doesn't take any risks. I think in a practical game it's very sensible. You don't want to sacrifice and lose everything when white has such a good position. But as it happens, sort of mathematically, there is a sack, which is here. King takes. You can then sack a knight as well. Sacking on f7. Rook takes. You've got the queen check, which forks the king and the rook. King runs, and then you've got g6, which threatens checkmate. Queen h7, queen h8. And also threatens the rook. So you can play knight f6, queen takes here, check, the game goes on. But the engine just has white winning this, and you can see why. But anyway, I think Purplerooks played a sensible move in this position, queen h5. I mean, also just calculating all of that stuff would have taken a lot of time. So I think in a practical blitz game, it is better. And these guys are moving very quickly. I mean, DJ Dave has used less than half a minute at this point. So they're playing quite quickly. And, you know, calculating all that stuff would take a lot of time. And the risk is you get into time trouble later on. Okay, so g6 to stop the checkmating threat. Queen g4, and now the idea might be pawn h5, taking on g6, and maybe putting the queen on the h file, deliver checkmate. Black takes, white takes back, and now black's trying to create some counterplay. Queen a5, attacking the pawn on c3, and if a pawn's attacked, what do you defend it with? Well, actually probably the only piece that can defend it is the king. And why not? And then getting that rook on the open file looks very sensible. Except for the fact that the knight can take on c6, forking the rook and the queen, and also forking bishop e7 check. So DJ Dave feels quite rightly that he can resign with good conscience. Good game, good attack, I think, played by Purplerooks. Interesting game. And next, we'll go on to look at something that DJ Dave played.